Welcome everyone to our first live stream event for the Remote AF community. Glad to have you here and fantastic. We've got a great presenter today, Dave McKenzie. He's one of the co-creators of the Remote AF. He is also one of the guides and he has been using Remote AF in anger for quite some time now, so to speak. And today we're going to get him to give us what we term as an experiential report, just how he's connected the dots with all of the different parts of Remote AF and how you use that with clients. So I'm going to shut up, stop talking, and hand over to the magnificent Dave McKenzie.
Awesome. Thanks, Tony. Hello, everyone, and good morning. And thank you all for joining or listening into this video. Yeah, as Tony said, I'm actually really excited to be here as well to talk about how I've been using the RAF patterns to help design systems of work for some of the clients I've been working with, and build really highly contextual systems that actually are very fit for what that organization is working through. So when I do that, when I think about RAF, I don't think about individual patterns by themselves that are standalone. I absolutely think about a series of interconnected patterns that flow end to end through the entire sort of design and implementation process. So I think of those patterns in sort of three groups. The first is a group of patterns we use to help design ways of working, to help build visibility and transparency and governance success criteria. So they're your launch patterns. So your governance patterns, your team of team launch pattern, your team launch pattern. Once we've designed the system of work, then it's a series of patterns or a group of patterns that actually help us inject that system full of work. So our strategy, how do we create our strategy? How do we break that down via inception and then plan it into the teams? And once we've created the environment and we've injected it full of work, what are the things or the pattern we use to actually connect it all together via the virtual Obeya? So looking for how do we govern the system? How do we manage it? How do we track? How do we use data to drive decision making? So when I think about that first grouping and designing the ways of working, the team of teams pattern is brilliant for that. And it really helps us do three major parts. The first is understanding context and defining governance. So each organization is very different. Understanding the context is incredibly important to being able to define and build something or design a system that is actually context specific. And it helps us overcome the change management challenge that's there as well. We also create the design principles and the governance, defining the governance values, because they're critical to understanding how we actually want to design our system of work and manage it long term. Once we kind of understand the context, we define the governance, move into launching the team of teams. I always start with launching the team of teams before the teams, because I like to use that team of teams pattern to define and design the sort of scaffolding or the structures that work around the teams themselves who are doing the delivery for things like planning, strategic alignment, how do we do decision making, what data we need, things like that. How do we know we're being successful? And once we've created that scaffolding via the team of teams launch, dropping down into the individual teams and empowering them by the team launch to design the way they want to work and interact and collaborate, communicate with each other, but at the same time still living and working within the overall construct of the team of teams and the governance values that we've created. So we get this really nice vertical alignment from the designing the ways of working. So when I talk about understanding context and defining governance, really we're looking at helping organizations understand that they are different and unique. I'm a big believer that frameworks are an amazing starting point. Any framework out there is a great starting point. But just putting a framework in is not actually going to get the best value for a client or a business that you're working with. Really, I want that framework to become very contextual and very much understanding of the environment that organization is working in, what success means for that organization, and then really clearly articulating how we want to govern that system. And that's critical because those parts actually underpin everything else we do. So I want to understand key supporters, key customers, where the spheres of influence are. I want to understand what success looks like especially, and then understand how do we want to lead our system of work via our governance values. So the example you can see there is from a manufacturing company. we ran the Team of Teams launch. This was the second workshop I think we ran. Really looking at that overall view of who do those teams interact with, what success look like at the organizational level, and the team level, and the Team of Teams level, and then defining the governance values, because I use those to actually underpin and score, for lack of a better way to describe it, all the other decisions get made when we do our design through the Team of Teams and the Teams launch. Then we move, once I've got the governance values, move into the team launch pattern. Most of you have seen this because I'm talking to the guides, which is great, but really looking for that Team of Teams pattern to define the structures overall that sit across the teams, and sort of coordination layer, and how those coordinating those teams and how they collaborate. So we're looking at things like how do they plan, how do they maintain strategic alignment, again success, how do we govern. So the Team of Teams pattern, you can see again the example. This is the full example of that manufacturing company I was talking about. I always split the Team of Teams pattern into multiple workshops. It gives us the opportunity to focus in. Usually when you work with Team of Teams, people at the Team of Teams level, you've got more senior leaders. Finding time is really hard. I can't find 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours continuously. So I try and find 4 or 5 1.5 hour blocks that we can do that. I always start with purpose and social contract. It helps build alignment as the first part. And then I really dive into the detail. So understanding landscape, success measures at the organizational, Team of Teams and teams level, and governance, as I've talked about just before. Then understanding the workflow and the cadences we need to support that. I'm a big believer of using the workflow to define the cadence. I don't necessarily believe that you need to run, say, a stand-up every week or every day, excuse me. I really want the cadence to be defined by what the workflow looks like and how much we need to move. So if the work doesn't move very quickly, I don't see value in meeting every day necessarily. If the work moves very quickly, or it's a rapidly changing piece, then maybe we don't meet once a week. We want to meet more regularly. We use a Team of Team launch to agree on how decisions are made. I really enjoy this workshop actually, because one of the things I love to do is actually put all the decisions on the leaders and then get them to delegate and force them and ask them the questions to say, why do you need to make this decision? If you trust your people and you've got good people, why are you making these decisions? Let them do it. And the last part usually becomes, in the Team of Teams launch, the team interaction design, which again, you can see that it's kind of on the sort of middle right of the screen and all these spaghetti lines everywhere. And I actually really enjoy that session as well, because I like teams especially to not hide from how complex the environment they work in is. A lot of teams actually think, oh, we just do our work and away we go, but they actually interact with a wide range, and we can get a lot of value in unpicking that spaghetti and helping them understand that these things are really difficult and these things are really complex. Let's find ways to design and smooth those out. So once we've created that scaffolding, we've got our governance values and we've created the scaffolding by the Team of Teams. The last part's to actually launch the teams. The launch pattern most of you have probably seen as well. But again, I'm really keen to do the Team of Teams first, build that scaffolding and let the teams themselves go, okay, well, within this constraint, within this structure, you go and launch your team and you work the way that makes the most sense for you, how you want to interact, especially in a remote or hybrid world. We've got those differences individually across teams too. So we want to take those into account and build something that's very specific to them. So start with the social contract is again, the pattern I always break into 3 1-hour sessions. It's just easier. People find they're able to concentrate more easily. I do, as I said, the social contract first, then into the system of work, very much the same as a Team of Teams. I let the workflow define how they want to run the cadences. I pre-fill from the decisions up that we did the decision delegation down into, from the Team of Teams down into the teams, to help them understand what decisions they can, and then ask the team themselves to refine and work through that. And then on the last session is around operating cadence. So how do we actually get the teams to talk to each other? Again, I create that spaghetti view that you can see on the top right there. Again, to really help people understand that this is a really complex and really, really difficult environment. We need to make it as purposeful as possible. But the key thing really for me becomes let the teams within the constraints of the organization, the guiding governance principles and the structures we've built within the team of teams to define a way of working that they want to do, and get them to buy that and get them to own it. It helps us overcome change management, but it also gives buy-in to the people that say, hey, this is the way you wanted to do it. Make sure we're sort of driving that through. So the first three pieces of work, or the first three patterns I use to define or design the system of work, and it's ready to launch and it's up and running. Now we need to inject it full of work. And I then think of the next sort of three pieces that that RAF gives us the ability to do is to break down our strategy and plan it. So again, a three-part is, start with defining the strategy, and RAF's got the strategy decomposition canvas, which helps us do that. So where do we want to go as an organization? For me, something that's very special there is understanding the type of strategy you need to get there, because we all know strategic clarity is critical to success. Once I've got the strategy, I run the inception process on the strategic initiatives to create the pieces of work that we need to be able to deliver. So ultimately, what are the tasks or activities we need to do to deliver on our strategy? Once we've got those work packages, then we move into planning at scale. This is, again, an actual real-life example for a digital team. At the top, you can see their strategic roadmap, which was where we defined overall, we defined the strategy and then broke it into its strategic initiatives for across 3 years, then into the individual teams, so DigiX, platformers, and Team Russ are on the bottom for their 12-month roadmap. What you can't see is the 3-month quarterly plan, but that's an example. Moving on. So with defining the strategy, I always use the strategy decomposition canvas. I think it's really powerful for the sheer fact that everyone builds strategy and anyone can put anything on a piece of paper. What the strategy decomposition canvas enables us to do to be really, again, very context specific. The one thing that I honestly believe is that we need to understand the situation that we're working in, the environment and the associated challenges. So I work for a company called Elaborate. Elaborate is Australian based, but it's in Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane. But Melbourne's environment is slightly different to Sydney's, and Sydney's environment is slightly different to Brisbane's when it comes to the type of work we do. So understanding those minor differences actually means that our objectives can be slightly different, or our key results can be slightly different if you're using OKRs. So I want to understand that. And once I've understood that sort of environment, I want to create themes that help us build context-specific objectives. And once we've got that and we create the objectives, then the thing that I'm really keen on is understanding the type of strategy we've got. So do we have a change-based strategy? Do we have a run-based strategy? Do we have a growth-based strategy? Do we have a operational improvement or efficiency-based strategy? And the reason I want to know that is because often when we go into delivery, if I've got a change-based strategy, and this occurred for a gaming company I work with, that a change-based strategy, but their teams were organized for run or functional teams. So in the RAF world, they had a mission type strategy, but they had operational type teams. There's a lot of friction that can occur with that because we end up with dependencies across different teams and it slows down delivery. So understanding the strategy type can help us understand what type of teams we need to be able to deliver on that strategy. I think the important thing for me when I'm doing this with clients, though, is I don't want to use strategy for strategy's sake. I really emphasize that we're not just firing forget. We don't just put strategy on a paper and we leave it. We actually use it the whole way throughout the delivery cycle to confirm we're doing the right thing. So anytime we do planning and prioritization, we go back to the strategy and look at that and say, are we doing the right thing? Does this help us push the needle? So we've created the strategy and now it's time to incept onto the work. And the simplest way to describe this is Remote AF's got an inception pattern, which I've used many times. And I find really valuable in the sense that organizations are really good at creating strategy and they're usually really good at doing work. They're very bad a lot of time in connecting the two together. So the inception process helps us overcome that. So we've created the strategy. Maybe we've got our strategic objectives via OKRs. What I then take is use the inception process to take those objectives and start breaking them into the tangible pieces of work that teams do. The example on the screenshot there is from a telecommunications company. And what you can see is across the top, You can see this big yellow box with some text. That's the strategic success outcomes or strategic objectives. So we took those and actually worked through and said, all right, well, what do we need to do to create that? And you can see the post-it notes and the streams that sit underneath that. So we start to basically do a free brainstorm with key people across the organization to understand what that looks like. Look at sequencing and priority. So what order we need to do them in. And then where possible, dive into that to start building some more understanding. So at the bottom of that screenshot, you can start to see deep dives into each of those post-it notes where we talk about, well, what is it? What success look like for that? So we start to bring in acceptance criteria. Do we need to know more information? Who's involved? Those sorts of things help us actually break that down and create work packages that people know about, which is great. It helps build that common understanding, which is important because once we move to planning, people need to know that. And then how do we, what are the additional pieces that we need around that? Is this ready, for lack of a better way to describe it? So it builds that connection between the strategy, and I find it incredibly important for effective delivery. So it's great that we've designed the system, we've got our strategy, now we're breaking our strategy into pieces of work for our teams to work on, which gives us our planning at scale. So most of you have been in an all-hands planning or a big room planning session before. You know what it's all about. What I really like about RAF and the RAF all-hands planning pattern is it allows us to create a plan, and that's incredibly important. That's strategic aligned, and and it's sequenced based on the inceptions. But it also allows us to drive into certain aspects. It allows us really quickly and easily to use capacity as a guiding principle. But what I find is most important, and I'm a portfolio manager by trade for a long time, is it actually lets us capture dependencies across teams really well and really visually. And you can see the example there. It's kind of like the top one to the left. You can see the work planned out, and this is from a telco. But you can see all the lines that exist across that, and their dependencies on that piece of work or those pieces of work into other teams. And the reason I want to capture that is ultimately for me, nothing syncs your program of work or your portfolio of work faster than dependencies that you're not managing. So being able to capture that and visualize that is critically important. We capture risks and mitigation actions as always. But the other thing that I really enjoy about using the RAF pattern for planning is you can actually connect them all, the planning patterns together. You can connect them all really well into one space. And the example I've got there is that purple box at the bottom. And what you can see there is when I was working with a financial company or a company in the financial industry is actually the horizontal sort of rows. They're the strategic initiatives. So what you can see without zooming in too much is you can see the strategic initiative. We incepted on that. We broke down the work packages and then we planned that initiative. And we've done that across all 9 of the strategic drivers for that organization, and then consolidated it all into an organizational wide plan. So you can see a strategic enablement roadmap right across the organization, right across all their strategy, all the teams that need to be involved, all highlighted. And you can use the connection of the RAF patterns to actually create things that for this organization they'd never seen before. They'd never had that level of visibility of their strategy in such a way. They had it on paper and they knew their teams were doing something, but they'd never seen it at that level. So we've created our work, a system of work. We've injected that system full of things that we need to deliver. Now we need to manage it. So the way we use that, or the pattern that I use for that, is the tying it together with a virtual Obeya. And I really land in 3 areas with that is, what do I need to make transparent into my virtual Obeya? What data do I need to capture? And then how do I use it? Again, a real life example. I've got better shots of that as we move through. So what to make transparent when I create an Obeya is a really interesting question. And the answer is it kind of just depends on the organization you're working with. For me though, I really want to understand that the virtual Obeya is a collection of critical information, data, highlights that helps us drive the way and manage the way we want to do work. I want to be incredibly transparent across our strategy, how we're going for delivery, our data and metrics, and our culture. So I'm starting to think about things that are going to help me do that. So when I need to work out what to make transparent with an organization, I often work with the leaders themselves, But I start with their governance. So let's make governance values as transparent as possible, because these are the things that we're going to pin back to all the time when asking people to work in a certain way. Once that's there, really use the strategy and the strategic decomposition canvases to map out, this is our strategy, so we can build that really nice vertical alignment. So teams can see if I'm working on a piece of work, it goes all the way up to strategy. And then I use the team of teams and teams launch patterns to capture and highlight team cadences, their workflows, key decision-making paradigms. And you can actually see that in this example. It's on the bottom right there. You kind of zoom it in, the values and the decision-making's there. I want to visualize what success looks like and the associated metrics. And the key thing for me is really remember your audience. So I may be creating it for a client, I may be creating it for a senior leader, but who are they using it with? So is their manager coming, or is their peer or their leader coming? Because they're looking for different things. I want to highlight what the audience wants and needs to see, because that's going to help me highlight what I need to capture and how I'm going to use it. So really just around making things as transparent as possible to support decision making. Capturing data. Well, organizations capture data for fun. There's more decision points than anything. For me, there's a couple of sort of rules I want to look for when I'm capturing data into the Obeya. I want data over time. I want real-time data is awesome. Things that highlight trends is even better, because I want to limit data staleness, minimize the chance of decisions using correct data. Better yet, I want to actually capture data over time with trends and apply context and apply experience to it. So I move away from data for decision making to information or wisdom for decision making. Data is a point in time, it's a 1 and a 0. I want my experience, or people's experience, applied to that. So we're making decisions based on the context of what's actually going on. So I want delivery data. I want maturity data in there. So how are my teams maturing their practices and processes? How's their engagement culture going? Customer value indicators. Ultimately, you can capture a million different things. Choose the ones that are most relevant and that provide you the most accurate picture to help you make decisions within your sphere of control. So you're using the Obeya to highlight things that are going on that you need to make decisions about. And this is a real life example for a company I work with now. And this is how we use the Obeya. So on the top left, you can see the strategy development, the strategy zone, where they've got their strategy, their strategic decomposition, and the individual projects that run to deliver their internal strategy. Bottom left is the work zone, where you can see the pipeline. So what's works incoming, what capacity planning they need to do, prioritization, and then the in-flight work. The data zone's a little bit blank here because not really using it. It's kind of work in progress bit. Up there, we've got the OKR scoring, things like pulse surveys, so how the team's going from a culture perspective. Customer satisfaction surveys live there. And then the culture zone down the bottom, we've got how the teams are organized, the cadences, their social, cultural, knowledge sharing activities are all mapped out there as well. So how does that all plug together? So it's a one-stop shop for anyone in that team or team of teams to come along and see what's going on in that space. So as I mentioned at the start, for me, I often think of RAF as, you can think of them as individual patterns, but in reality, I think of them as 3 major stages and a grouping of them that connects all of them together and then flows into the next. So I use the team of teams and team launch patterns to design contextual ways of working. Once I've got that, I use strategic decomposition, the inception and the planning patterns to inject that system with work to deliver. And then I use the virtual Obeya to tie it all together and use that to track. And that's the end. So thank you all. I think you might be on mute, Tony.
No, I'm not now. That's brilliant. Brilliant, Dave. Great to have you and give us all of those examples. We've got a few minutes left for questions. There's a couple in the chat that came through. So one of them is, what are the greatest obstacles you have when you're trying to actually get the organisation to take this process on?
Yeah. End-to-end, assuming that they've signed on is the first part. Trying to get an organization to shift and see the need is of the first part. So if we assume they've seen the need and they know they need to make that change or they want to make that change, the greatest obstacle for me becomes availability of time, because you really need people in there to buy in and give their time. Because what I find, what my favorite thing about the RAF patterns is that it's an emergent practice. So it really relies on people coming together and collaboratively designing the system. I use the patterns to help them design the system. I don't use a pattern to design the system or just give them a model. So time becomes the most important thing. How do we make time with leaders and teams to invest the thinking?
Yeah,
it's a great, and it's the ultimate, Martin. It's the ultimate question that sort of lives there. How do you get them to make time? Well, as a consultant, sometimes it's play nice. Hey, this is what you want to do. This is what you brought it in. This is the path we need to go down to achieve what you're looking for and the outcomes. Sometimes as a consultant, Martin, I often go, hang on, you're paying a lot of money for me to be here. This is what you want to achieve. If you don't give your time, then we're not getting there. So sometimes it's the chocolates and sometimes it's the stick, to a better way to describe it. But time's the critical thing. Ultimately, it's the number one driver for this. RAF is brilliant, and I often tell the teams I'm working with is these patterns are going to create something that's very contextual to your space. But to do that, you need to be involved. I need your time, because no one understands your environment better than you. I can give them best practices, I can give them vanilla frameworks, but I can't give them the context. So I need their time to give them the context. Yeah.
Brilliant. John, you got a question there?
What's the most memorable piece of feedback you've gotten on the tail end? So like you've gone and done all this stuff. What are people saying about this work as you're wrapping it up?
Yeah, there's a few sorts of examples. There's one that sticks to my mind. There's two actually. There's one that sticks in my mind, and it was when we did the team launch with a team of developers, a software development team, and they all loved remote working, so they're staying at home. But that team launch, when we did the sort of behaviors part or the social contract, one of the team members actually called out that she was an older lady that lived by herself. And whilst everyone was saying, we want to work from home, this is amazing, we love working from home, she actually had the opportunity to step up, and she never had that opportunity to step up and say, well, I actually need us to get together. I don't see people at the moment unless I'm in the office. And she was very social, and that was her escape. So the piece of feedback I got from there is that approach or that pattern itself enabled her to step up and let her team know that she actually needed that, which was great. The other, probably the key one that jumps out off the top of my head, John, and one of the examples I put in the pack is for that financial company or financial industry company, was just how we used the strategy and then the inception process to create roadmaps for the strategic pieces of work, but then brought that all in together. So the actual CEO came out to the executive team when that was presented to them and said that over their life, they'd never seen anything that had brought it all together to that level. So the ability to make the strategy and how that strategy breaks into work, and then how we plan that work across a quarter or a year, and then bringing all of those disparate pieces together into a central point where the most senior leader in an organization can look at that and go, wow, that's all the things that are going on strategically within my organization, was incredibly powerful. And that's probably the piece of feedback that jumps off from that perspective.
Yeah, I love that. Definitely on fire was the emoticon I gave you for that one, because that's the kind of feedback that you yearn for. There's a question in the chat there from Martin, thinking of system of work strategy before team construction or vice versa. I can see that if you go through strategy first, you might decide to change team structure. Yep. Thoughts on that, Dave?
Yeah, Martin, it's kind of like the way I approach it. It's funny, I have an internal conversation with a peer of mine who goes slightly the other way. They adjust the way they break the work down based on the team pattern. I break the work down and go, all right, what type of teams do I need? There's no right or wrong. I I'm a big believer, and I guess this is more of my, as a guide, that I bring to a client that I need to be really aware of, is that I think strategy should drive where we want to go. I think our only real resource within an organization is the capacity of our people. So I want to set them up to deliver the most important things. So for me, that becomes strategy. So where do we want to go with an organization? Let's break it down. Okay, what's the type of work that we've got? Do we have the right models to do that? Now, a lot of the time we do, and that's fine. But yes, to answer your question, sometimes when we go strategy first, break it down, that tells us that we don't have the right teaming construct, and we may need to adjust how those teams look. And that's okay. Andrew Blaine said to me once, and I'm a big believer of this as well, is we should be looking at how our teams are organized on the same cadences that we're looking at our strategy. Because as our strategy changes over time, the way we're organized as an organization needs to change over time. It should not be a set in stone and leave. So yes, often I'll look at the strategy and go, okay, as that decomposes, what type of strategy do we have? Okay, and let that organically happen, and then adjust the teams around that strategy. A peer of mine, as I mentioned, he tends to look at it and go, okay, I've got these teams are organized in this way. And again, he's adjusting that on a cadence-based approach as well. But the teams are organized in this way. When we decompose the strategy, he puts constraints on how that strategy is constrained, so it routes into the teams nicely. So it's more of an approach than a sort of a perspective and a bias than a hard and fast rule.
Fantastic. Look, we're at the end of our time. Dave, I just want to thank you on behalf of everybody for spending the time with us this morning, because we know you've got a working day right ahead in front of you. You've taken this time. If you're watching this and you're not already part of the Remote AF community, please go to remoteaf.co, click on the community button and join us. You'll see more of these events. If you are part of the community and you're seeing this async, try and join us for some of the synchronous ones as well. On behalf of Remote AF and the Remote AF community, thank you again, Dave.
All right, thank you, Tony. Been a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.